Hi, I'm Jennifer, and this is My True Ghost Stories, where I share stories of my supernatural adventures as a spiritual medium, helping trapped spirits to cross over and more. Let's get started. Welcome to episode 13 of My True Ghost Stories. Today, I will tell you two stories of dads communicating to their daughters through me from the other side. And let's begin. The name of this story is Bobby. This story is about the absolute first time I ever delivered a message from a spirit to the living. Someday I will tell you the story of how I began receiving messages and the first spirit I ever helped to cross over. But for this story, I will tell you that I had just figured out that all these ghosts that I saw, heard, and felt all the time, yes, just like the little boy said in the Sixth Sense movie, these ghosts that I saw all the time were trying to communicate something through me or needed my help somehow. So at this stage, that's all I knew. I had no idea what I was doing. Around this time, one day, I became aware of the spirit of a little boy hanging around me. I saw a movement in the corner of my eye and a strong picture in my mind's eye of him. And this was nothing new. I always felt and saw spirits around me. But now, because of recent developments in my spiritual life that I will tell you about in a future episode, now, instead of fearfully trying to ignore these spirits and pretend that this wasn't happening, I was starting to pay attention to them with the idea that maybe I could help them. I had also started to ask for their names. And this little boy's name was Bobby, and he seemed to be around 7 or 8. It could be that the powers that be that want me to do this work realize that I would do well with a benign, friendly little boy spirit. I can handle scary spirits now, but I couldn't back then. So this was on a weekend afternoon, and I had some plans, and it became clear that Bobby intended to spend the day with me. I'm going to describe the afternoon and early evening that I spent with this spirit named Bobby, and then I'm going to tell you the relevance of each activity at the end of the story. And this stuff was relevant. The first thing I got a message that Bobby wanted to do was use the bathroom. And I was walking past a construction site when I got this message from Bobby about using the bathroom. And I said, okay. And he headed for a portosan on the construction site. And I waited there for a minute until I felt that he was back with me. And off we went. At this time in my life, I was making a small, very small amount of extra money doing sing-alongs at children's birthday parties. And that's where I was headed on that weekend afternoon. And Bobby came along with me to that, and I had a strong sense of him sitting next to me throughout, and also a sense of joy from him as we sang and clapped and danced and all the things that you do at a children's birthday sing-along. After this early afternoon party, I was headed to what I will call a weekly support group type thing where people are trying to learn how to get along with their friends and families. That's what I'm going to call it. And Bobby stood next to my seat at that table. And I got the impression that he was really listening to the people there talk about how they were setting boundaries with and also helping their loved ones. After leaving this gathering, it was time for pizza, and I enjoyed my slice while Bobby sat right next to me in the booth. And I was really getting used to having this sweet, engaged, albeit invisible, kid accompany me all over town. After pizza, it was time for an early evening church service. And yes, this is the same church that is in so many of my stories. And at this time, I had only attended a few services there. I was new there. We entered the church, and Bobby wanted to sit in one of the back pews on the right. We sat down, and Bobby gave me a message to open the Bible from the hymnal rack in front of us. I took it out, opened it up, and it fell open to the Old Testament passage called The Rivalry of Rachel and Leah, the story of two sisters with a serious rivalry who clearly could not get along. And then came a clear message from the guides around Bobby, not Bobby himself. And the message was, "Tell Margaret we want her to meet St. Nicholas." And with that, Bobby disappeared with a rush of upward energy, like a strong gust of wind had just taken him away. And I felt so sad in that church pew. I missed him. I had really enjoyed his company, and I could tell that he was really gone. I felt his absence. But the relevance of his presence and our day together was about to become quite clear. Now, this Margaret, who the message about St. Nicholas was for, was a woman who worked at that church, and it became clear to me that I needed to talk to her. And I was so scared. I was scared even though she was a nice lady, but I had never delivered a message before, so I was pretty nervous. I went by the church a few days later, after gathering my thoughts and my courage, to see if Margaret was in her office and maybe if I could figure out how to give her this weird message about meeting St. Nicholas. I had never done anything like this before, and the message made absolutely no sense to me, so I was a nervous wreck headed up to the door of those church offices. And I briefly hoped that maybe I was wrong, and maybe it was all to bring me to the front lawn of this church campus where there was a war memorial with some names on it. And maybe Bobby is there, and I don't actually have to talk to anyone, and I can have a silent, private conversation with the spirit. But alas, nobody named Bobby was on the war memorial, and I had to resume my terrified trek up to the church office building. After being let in by the receptionist, I found Margaret in her office, and I said, "I have to tell you something." Now, she barely knew me, except for saying hello at the few church services I had just begun attending. And it was so awkward. "What do you have to tell me?" she asked in a friendly voice, because I was just standing there. "Well, it's kind of, it's a message for you." "Okay, what is it?" she said, still friendly, and probably a little puzzled and maybe even wondering about this Jennifer person standing in her office, stammering. So I finally blurted out, "Well, they want you to meet St. Nicholas." And her eyes opened wide. "Who?" she said. "Who sent this message?" And now I was freaked out because she was getting all intense about it, and now I couldn't even look directly at her. And I said quietly, while just looking at her sideways, "Well, the guides around this spirit that was sort of like hanging around here." And she was standing now, and she asked even more insistently, "Who?" And I mustered up all my strength and said in this tiny little voice, "Bobby?" And she started to sob. This was the name she was expecting. With tears streaming down her face, She said, "My father was Bob." It was years later that she told me that her birthday is on the Feast of St. Nicholas, and she didn't ever give me details why, but she did tell me that the quote, "We want you to meet St. Nicholas," coming from her father's guides made total sense to her. It was something between her and her dad. As we stood in her office that day, and I got up the nerve to tell her a little more, I had written down the Old Testament passage about the sisters, the rivalry of Rachel and Leah, and I said, "Also, they wanted us to see this?" And then she began to cry again. His sisters could not get along. And she quickly mentioned that she knew that he had always felt responsible, even as a little boy, for intervening in their lifetime of fights. And it was at that point that my day with Bobby started to make more sense to me. "Oh, wow," I just kept saying to Margaret. "Wow." I felt bad because she was so upset. And then her coworker started knocking on the door because she was apparently supposed to be at a meeting, and she had thought when this started that I was that new lady who had just started attending services who had to tell her something real quick. But she hadn't expected this. And I hadn't expected this. I had thought, this being my first delivered message, that I would say, "They want you to meet St. Nicholas," and she would look at me weirdly, thank me, and send me on my way. And because she was a nice church lady with a really nice vibe, I had had the courage to at least try to give a message, which was something I felt I was being called to do. But I had not expected in any way that the message would land this squarely and cause such a reaction. Remember, I had no idea what I was doing. The knocking coworkers finally started opening the door, cautiously saying, "Margaret, are you coming to the meeting? Is everything okay?" And upon opening the door fully, they found the two of us standing like 5 feet apart in the middle of the room, her crying and me looking terrified. And she said, "I'm fine. Do you all remember Jennifer from last Sunday?" And they courteously greeted me, nervous side glances all around. And I guess it was a very important meeting that she was missing because they sort of shuttled her off while they said goodbye to me as I walked past the receptionist and out the front door, where I stood on the steps saying, "Oh my God, oh my God," over and over again. And I know there is a security camera there, so I imagine this part of my experience was witnessed by many. But as intense and scary as this message delivery had been, I knew that it was what I was supposed to do that day. Because over the years, I became friends with Margaret, and I learned a lot about her family, including her father in his life. And I'm going to go through that day that I shared with little Bobby and tell you what I have learned to be the significance of each activity that we did together. Remember that the first thing that Bobby wanted to do was use the bathroom. I will not give any details on the circumstances around how Margaret's father, Bob, passed away, but I will say that using the bathroom is something he would have wanted to do. Next, Bobby came with me to a child's birthday party, seemed to participate in the sing-along, and seemed to really enjoy it as a child would. And from what I learned from Margaret over the years, her father was saddled early in life with the responsibility of keeping the peace between his constantly fighting older sisters. I don't know if it was imposed on him by his family or something he just took upon himself, but there was pressure on him as a kid. And I imagine he didn't have a lot of carefree times, like a sing-along at a birthday party. Margaret says he would have loved that. Next, he came along with me to a support group that focuses on setting boundaries with problematic family members and friends. And he stood beside my chair and listened. This boundary setting being talked about there is a skill Margaret says her dad could have used, because his sense of responsibility for managing his sister's rivalry apparently lasted his whole life, and he was as affected by it as an adult as he was as a child. He came with me for pizza, and Margaret never told me as much, but how could he have not loved pizza? Don't all New Yorkers love a good slice of pizza? And I know he was from Queens, so, pizza. And he came to church because church had been a part of his life, and he wanted to show me the Bible story of the rival sisters. And he wanted to go there because his beloved daughter Margaret worked there. And there was some message regarding her birthday on the same day as the feast of St. Nicholas that is between the two of them. She never told me what it was, but it was something. And it seems that I was able to bring Bobby's child spirit to the places and the experiences he needed in order to cross over, which he did with a real whoosh from that church pew. The other wonderful things that came from this was that I had a successful first-time message delivery, and it was to Margaret, a truly spiritual, kind, and faithful woman who, over the years, became my biggest cheerleader as I ventured into this world of mediumship. And it connected me to this paranormal hotspot of a church building where I'm able to be of service all the time. But the best part of this experience for me is that I was able to reconnect Margaret and her dad. Two people that clearly will always have a bond beyond this dimension. I seem to get a lot of communication from fathers to their children. One day I was at the gym stretching after my workout, which is meditative to me, even at the noisy gym, with the weights clanking, the people grunting, and loud house music, and sometimes classic rock. And I'm one of the few people there not wearing headphones, so I hear it all. And despite this, or who knows, maybe because of it, while stretching at the gym, I always wind up in this meditative state. So while I was stretching and meditating there on the mats in the middle of the gym, I got a vision. Not a thought, but a vision. And a vision is almost like a slideshow in my head, with a single slide that is a scene that someone wants me to see. The scene in this vision was of the departed father of a dear friend of mine, and this friend was not there at the gym with me. Her dad in this vision was sitting back in an armchair, looking outwards, and the vibe was one of relaxation and happiness. There were no other details to the vision. It was an all-white background and sort of enclosed in like a diorama. So I got the message that her dad, sitting there in this chair, looking relaxed and happy, was the only thing I was supposed to see. In the vision, he wasn't looking at me or trying to directly contact me, and I could tell that the contact was to show me this snapshot, this diorama. I focused on the vision, and it became clear that he wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me at her, my friend, his daughter, wherever she was. And in the vision, he leaned forward, motioned with one hand outward, and said, with love and pride, "Look at her." And he sat back and continued his gaze. And that was the end of the vision. To me, this was heaven for my friend's father, sitting back, relaxing, and watching his daughter, his pride and joy, live her life. And I believe he, or his guides, or my friend's guides, wanted her to know that he is with her. My friend has always told me that she feels her dad's presence, so I quickly called her after I left the gym to tell her about this vision. And she was very pleased for the confirmation that he is indeed still with her. And although he is no longer physically there, his love and admiration remain as strong as ever. And there you have it. It seems that supportive, loving parents can continue to be supportive and loving, even from the other side. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend and take a second to review this show and help it grow. And that's all for today. Thank you for listening to today's episode. And if you think your house is haunted, want energy cleared from your space, or need a custom spiritual ritual, I'm here to help. Visit jpclearing.com or email me at jpclearing60@gmail.com. Don't forget to join me here every Tuesday for a new episode. Until next time.